Hi, this is Dennis for MediaMaker.tips, and today I wanted to deepen on the subject of lenses for mirrorless Sony cameras. But unlike our previous video where we touched on lenses for full-frame cameras more than APS-C sized cameras, today I want to concentrate specifically on cropped cameras and lenses for those, as well as explain what the technical difference is, and just overview the market in general and share my opinion on which lenses are the best. So enough talking, let's start. But first I want to explain why this video has taken place and why the previous video on best Sony lenses is not necessarily sufficient. And there are several reasons for that. First, you have a bigger selection because you are not only limited by full-frame lenses, but also you have a choice of lenses that Sony and third-party manufacturers design specifically for APS-C cameras. Now, unlike full-frame cameras, which can be used both on full-frame cameras and cropped cameras, these lenses can only be used fully on APS-C sized cameras. It doesn't mean that you can't attach them to full-frame cameras, but you will in any case get a cropped image because the light circle these lenses produce is simply not enough to cover the full-frame sensor. Thus, you will get a 1.5 crop factor even if you use this lens on a full-frame sensor, limiting your resolution. The next reason is that lenses for cropped sensors are cheaper to design and manufacture, thus they offer a better value compared to the use case where you would have used full-frame lenses on a cropped body. And last but not least, they are designed for a higher pixel density sensor. So if you look at, say, the XO Mark, you might see that these lenses only offer like 13-14 megapixels of perceptual resolution, which might seem low when you compare it to like full-frame lenses on full-frame bodies. But the thing to take into account here is that if you see results for a specific camera, say APS-C Sony A6000, you might see that even the best full-frame lens actually produces even less than 14 megapixels of perceptual resolution, despite being more expensive. So why is it then, for instance, Sony FE 28mm lens, that is one of the best on full-frame cameras and can produce 24 perceptual megapixels of sharpness on Sony A7R, only manages to deliver 13 on cropped Sony A5000. The actual reason why it happens is because on APS-C sensor, pixels cramped very close together. So even though the actual resolution is smaller, the amount of pixels per millimeter or per inch is higher, and the optics of the lens itself are unable to deliver this kind of clarity. This is also proved by numbers. So for example, Sony A6000 have a pixel pitch of 3.92 microns, which in other words means that each pixel is 0.0039 millimeters wide. And on full-frame A7R, the pixel pitch is 4.51 microns. This allows an easier life for the lens because the pixels are not very close together and can be distinguished more easily. But enough optics theory, let's get to the lenses themselves. Just remember that all focal length we have in this review should be effectively multiplied by 1.5 to get equivalent field of view and also equivalent amount of bokeh for the aperture. And the first we have a pair of best portrait lenses for APS-C sensor, and those are Sony E50mm f1.8 OSS and Sigma 60mm f2.8. Both these lenses are supremely sharp, and Sigma actually is a little bit sharper than Sony, but Sony has one stop wider aperture, which will make for nicer bokeh. and optical stabilization is also a killer if you don't have the latest and greatest A6500, which has image stabilization on sensor. This was one of my personally favorite lenses when I owned NEX 5R, and yeah, I took some great pictures with it. That optical stabilization was really helpful because I was able to pull like 1/30 of a second exposures handheld, and that's on a lens with the equal focal length of 75mm, which is pretty impressive. They both go for around $300, with Sigma being slightly less expensive, so it's up to you which one you pick up. Then we have what I'll probably name the best lens in ecosystem, and it's a recently released Sigma 30mm f1.4. I think Sigma just nailed it with this lens, both in terms of very universal focal length and extremely bright aperture. With 40mm in equivalent focal length, this lens will work great both for portrait photography and even for landscapes and astrophotography. So if you can only get one lens for your camera, this should be it. But if you want something a little bit wider than 45mm, then Sigma 19mm f2.8 has got you covered. With its equivalent focal length of 28mm, it will work very well for street photography, where you need to capture the details in small streets, and even for astrophotography, despite its not so bright f2.8 aperture. Due to the crop factor, it's very hard to find a truly super wide angle lens for these cameras, and the ones we have here are quite expensive, nearing the $1,000 mark. For most use cases, I would recommend Sony E10 to 18mm f4, and for most use cases I would recommend Sony lens over Carl Zeiss, simply because it's much more versatile and actually has the same level of sharpness, which is a true achievement for a zoom lens. Of course, f4 aperture is not very bright, but for landscapes it will ensure that you have sharpness throughout your frame. Matter of fact, the only reason why I put Carl Zeiss here is because if you want to shoot some astrophotography on your Sony camera, then f4 will be definitely not enough, and that's where Carl Zeiss with f2.8 aperture comes to rescue you, although for a stick price. Now, if you want some telephoto lens, you'll have to spend some money. I believe we had this lens in our full-frame cameras review, and it's still the best telephoto and macro lens even on cropped cameras. Optically, it's almost perfect, and image stabilization also will help if your camera doesn't have sensor stabilization. So with a bright aperture, it can be quite a good lens to capture wildlife or even for portrait photography. I wouldn't recommend it to most people though, just simply because it's very expensive. But if you know that you need that 135mm equivalent, then that's the lens to go. Next, we have the best zoom lenses, which are kings of versatility. I personally think that in a Sony cropped cameras ecosystem, you should go for several prime lenses over one zoom lens. The reason for that is that I don't believe that changing a lens is such a difficult adventure, and they simply offer much better optical performance for your money. Having said that, though, if you're really the kind of person who just wants to put one lens on and never change it and just forget about it, then Sony EPZ18 to 105mm would be the best option for you. With a $600 price tag, it's not the sharpest lens out there, neither it is best optically performing, but with such a wide focal coverage, it's really versatile. You really don't need any other lens, and fixed f4 aperture is not too bad as well. Plus, it has optical stabilization, so you can take advantage of longer shutter speeds even handheld. Now onto the second lens here. For telephoto shooting, I still recommend that FE 90mm Sony, but if you need some versatility and want to be able to zoom in and out of your subject, then this is the lens to get. It's not as bright and definitely not as sharp as our prime contender, but with this lens, apart from versatility, you also get the better telephoto performance, because it will give the equivalent field of view to 300mm lens on a full-frame camera, so you can really zoom in on your subject. Now, it's quite expensive, and aperture is not very bright, as well as the lens itself is quite bulky for compact APS-C camera, but if you need something to shoot wildlife with, this might not be such a bad option. So there we go. I hope you find this video informative. As always, for more details, you can check out our website, mediamakers.tips. Check out links for the product discussed in the video description. And on that note, I wish you an inspiration, and yeah, keep getting better in your art. See you the next time.